Oh man, it's a lot to unpack here. Seriously. So, when you think Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies, kind of think back to your childhood a little bit, depending on, the time frame you were born. You at least think about like happy, friendly, childlike cartoons, right? Not quite. So, I'm doing research for another video and I stumbled across what's called the Censored 11. Now, I'm initially intrigued because it's censored, so why? So, I immediately begin my investigation. And yes, indeed, my mind is blown. So, let's get into it. What are the Censored 11? Well, according to Wikipedia, it's a group of Looney Tunes and Merry Melody cartoons that were originally produced and released by Warner Brothers that were withheld from syndication in the US by the UA, known as the United Artists, since 1968. Now, what's interesting here is they claim that these 11 cartoons were specifically pulled because they were deemed way too offensive for the newer, I guess, contemporary audiences. Now, this is interesting because I looked for these 11 offensive cartoons. I mean, these are supposed to be like real messed up. Now, I can say they were nothing short of overly offensive. Now, I'm going to get into detail about these 11 offensive cartoons that were literally created, thought of, and greenlit by all parties involved. And just take a second to look at the racial climate of that time frame. Okay, so let me just get into it. So the first one that they deemed like completely racist was created in 1931. All right, let's not forget that all 11 cartoons that were extremely offensive were pulled in 1968. So from 1968, there was nothing more. So for, it seems like already 30 years, we had these cartoons running. Interesting. So 1931, we have Hitting the Trail for Hallelujah Land. And I really mean the bare minimum I can say for this animation here is fucking racist, man. Alright, and that wasn't enough, so then we turn around. In 1936, we got Sunday Go to Meeting Time. And I think it's also funny too, like the improper way they spelled all these words, like just trying to show like the lack of linguistics and like intelligence, I guess, of the people of color of that time. It's just it's crazy. Then we fast forward to 1937. We got Clean Pastures and Uncle Tom's Bungalow. Now, Uncle Tom was like a really interesting, big, prominent character of this particular time. I'm going to do another video on that because that's a lot to unpack there, just alone by itself. Turn around and you got Jungle Jitters in 1938. The Isle of Pingo Pongo, which is in 1938, but they decided that wasn't enough and had to reissue it in 1944. All right, this is now Tex Avery. 1941, we have All This and Rabbit Stew. Then 1943, Coal Black and the Seven Dwarfs. I had to say it like that because like the phonetics of this is ridiculous. They are trying. And again, by the same artist in the same year, we have Tin Pan Alley Cats. Bust a U-Turn, 1944. We're looking at Angel Puss. I don't even know where to begin there with that one. And the cap of this nice racist prepackaged meal would be Goldilocks and the Jivin' Bears in 1944. And of course, since they were already reissuing some of their racist content, they decided, of course, to hit a reissue in 1951 as well for the Goldilocks and Jivin' Bears. I literally can only imagine that's kind of how they said it in their heads when they were writing that. This is ridiculous. So what we have here is in 1951, it pretty much put a cap to a generous amount of their popular racist content, because outside of the censored 11, there are quite a bit more like racist animations still pertaining to people of color and then other nationalities as well. I'm gonna have to do a separate video on that, that too, because that got way bigger than I expected, like this one. So I'm just gonna set the scene right quick. It's 1951, these consistent perpetual stereotypes, and now we're looking at Goldilocks and the Jiving Bears. I'm just gonna let that sit right there. Now, I feel like it's necessary for me to give an interesting view on why this is something that I'm focusing on right now. So, let's look at this climate, right? But to be all the way honest with you, before I can really give a real in-depth view of where I'm about to go with this, I think it's important I just take you guys all the way back to the beginning of how we got here, because this racist media had to come from somewhere. It was inspired by something, and that's pretty much what I want to get into today. How this was not an overnight thought process. This literally was a continual, perpetual pushing of ideas over the particular population about another population. So I'm going to cover at least between 100 to 200 years of this kind of nonsense going on since before the age of even television. So let's get into it. According to the narrative, the Revolutionary War lasted approximately 7 years, from the year of 1775 to 1783. Again, according to the narrative, America gained its independence from Great Britain July 4th, 1776. That's a whole nother video for a whole nother day. So, according to the narrative, America gained its independence in 1776, and now they're free. So, what do you do if you're an American in 1776 and you gained your independence from another country that you feel like was being oppressive to you? You enslave more people. So, right immediately, that's exactly what we're told the North American colonists did immediately. Now, according to the narrative, you have the slave trade going on, the North American slave trade, in which the same European settlers and colonists who just fought their way to, of course, take this land, have decided to go to yet another land and bring people to the same land they fought for. Okay. So for the sake of this video and the convoluted history behind the narrative of the North American slave trade, I'll start it around 1783. But remember, this is all still according to the narrative, okay? So, okay, here we are. Let's go ahead and skip about 5 more years. The year 1788, and slaves are here, okay? They are in North America due to the transatlantic slave trade, according to the narrative. And they are experiencing, of course, the slavery we know of today. So, let me just lay this out. From 1776 up until about 1823, not only has America de facto from its original country, came to another country, fought their original country, won, kept the land, went across seas, kidnapped people to bring them back to the country they just fought for, enslaved them, and have now derived a form of entertainment based on the same people. Got it? Good. So now the year is 1828. It's been literally 52 years since the country has gained its independence, kidnapped and enslaved a group of people, and have now created what we know as minstrel shows as a form of entertainment, of course. So we have Thomas Dartmouth Rice, and he is, according to the narrative, given credit for being the pioneer of blackface. Okay? So when you see actual physical depictions of what they're considering to be Jim Crow. This is the guy that is accredited to creating this visual. And again, a lot of the things I'm talking about in this video, I will have more videos for in the future, because I do believe things like the minstrel shows in general, they deserve their own video. American history, that definitely deserves its own video. The transatlantic slave trade definitely deserves its own video. And a whole list of others. So don't worry if I'm not going into detail. I'm trying to stay on topic. It's really hard for me because it's literally so much to unpack here. But anyway, okay, so this would begin a trend that would literally just snowball into something bigger. So in 1842, we have Daniel Decatur Emmett and 3 others who create the Virginia Minstrels. 1844, the Ethiopian Serenaders. They were invited to play at the White House. That's interesting. 1847, we have the Christie Minstrels. 1852, Uncle Tom's Cabin was published. That's something that, of course, needs its own video and is catered to this timeline. Okay, so over the next 24 years, this will be the beginning of a lot of the African American stereotypes that are so well prevalent, even recognizable today. So let's start with identifying some of these anti-black caricatures. Starting with coon. Coon was used a lot to reference people of color in that time frame. Its name is rooted in the abbreviation of the word raccoon. Of course, to dehumanize. Coons were portrayed as frightened, inarticulate, lazy, that's a big one, and just an overall buffoon. And you can hear many references to the word coon and a lot of songs and imagery from that time frame. Next up, we have the Sambo. Sambo is portrayed as a perpetual child, not capable of living as an independent adult, showing, of course, his incompetency and his need for his white supremacy. One of the major characteristics that distinguished the coon from the Sambo is that the coon, although working as a servant, was not happy with his status. However, he was too lazy or incompetent to change his lowly position. Interesting. So we have the Sambo that's being identified with the older, docile people of color crowd who accepted the Jim Crow laws and the etiquette of that time. And then, of course, on the other hand, you have coons who were identified with the young, urban people of color who they felt like disrespected the white people, of course. So in their views, coon was basically Sambo gone bad. All right, on to my favorite one, the mammy. So mammy's characteristics are usually portrayed as an older black woman who is overweight. She's looked as a maternal caregiver. She is indeed the most well-known. And one of the major characteristics of her is an undying love for her white owners. Oh, and let's not forget, she was 100% desexualized. So there we have it, the caregiver who does not care about herself, only cares about her white family. She's an extremely faithful worker and is considered the right hand of the plantation. So yeah, that's the mammy troop. Moving right along, the last one I'm going to cover today is the Jezebel, and or sometimes commonly referred to as the Hoochie Mama or Hoochie Mammy or Tragic Mulatto. Man, okay, so this is a lot, so brace yourselves. So I just want to begin by saying that this one particular caricature is one of the many ways women of color at this time, women of color were sexually objectified at this particular time. This caricature, honestly, is the most interesting to me, as what we already know to be true to how women of color in that particular time were treated by their slave masters. In a nutshell, they didn't care. They were sexually abusing these women all the time, even the young men. Again, another video. Sex forms. Let's get into it. Alright. So, in regards to how history regarded white women, how they were portrayed as a model of self-respect, modesty, and self-control, even going as far as saying sexual purity, because this is what was promoted at the time, where the women of color were often portrayed as pretty much innately promiscuous and most of the time predatory. So in this regard, this is where the Jezebel trope comes in. So now we have the mammy, which is completely desexualized. We have the Jezebel or hoochie mama, which is over-sexualized. And no, I did not go into the tragic mulatto. That definitely deserves its own video. Okay, I said I was probably only gonna do these 4, but I just really gotta give like some reference to Zip Coon, which is like a totally different caricature. Outside of Coon and Sambo, you have now Zip Coon. Now, a lot of you have seen representations of Zip Coon represented in media, might I add, with or without knowing. So Zip Coon was really interesting to me, as it pretty much depicts the idea thereof of a man of color poorly assimilating into European society. He wears European clothes and attempts to have European mannerisms, but yet again he's depicted as a bit too ignorant to make the cross. So it's kind of like a spin on intelligence, or lack thereof. So, again, I did not cover wench, dandy, pickaninnies, porch monkeys, etc. I mean, like, the list literally goes on. These are just the 5 main I'm just going to cover right now. Again, I'm going to be covering these other ones in future videos. But yeah, these pretty much are some of the caricatures and characters that were created around this time by non-people of color to represent people of color around the world. Albeit male or female, they overall were all depicted as ignorant, poorly spoken, easily conned, and just overall intellectually incompetent. So, according to the narrative, this is what's hot right now. This is what's popping, and this is what's selling, alright? So we have these European colonists / settlers who are now depicting the people that they've, according to the narrative, captured and kidnapped and forced into slavery on a foreign land, again, according to the narrative. They are selling these shows, and they're doing these shows across the world. But not only are they doing these shows, they're now producing manuscripts, newspapers, again, for the world to see. And they're going. They're also making toys for young children to play with, of course, to enforce the narrative. And not to go off topic or anything, but respectfully, the 1800s, literally back to like the 14th or 13th century, literally is questionable as fuck, to say the least. Really interesting time. So, to pick back up, history, or rather the narrative, would have us believe that this type of depiction of people of color literally only lasted about 150 years. I have evidence to prove otherwise. I don't believe that this depiction of people of color had ever changed. I believe, if anything, these caricatures, they never left. They simply evolved. Don't worry, video on the way. So, quick recap. So, defectors from Britain fought their homeland to take this land. They won against their homeland, again, according to the narrative. After gaining their independence, immediately went to work to enslave more people from another country. Immediately upon taking them to enslave them in this country, they created false narratives and dehumanizing stereotypes to, of course, degrade and dehumanize the same humans they, according to the narrative, kidnapped from another location. Then proceed to pass the propaganda all over the world. So now we have 1915. What a year, right? I know what happened in 1915. The Birth of a Nation was officially released. Considered actually one of the first films. I did not say the first film, one of the first films. But this is honestly one of the first major motion picture films ever. This is indeed one of the most seen and sought after film of that particular time. Now, what this movie is about, I'll just give a brief overview because, again, that's definitely a whole nother video by itself. So basically, it just focuses on two families during the Civil War, according to the narrative, during the Reconstruction period of that war. Now, something else I think is interesting too, Reconstruction comes up a lot between the 16th century and the early 19th century, but okay. So one family is from the north, one family is from the south, and it shows the two different ideas that both families support around that time. And overall, it's just really racist. It just depicts people of color in like the nastiest way. Whole nother video for this, like The Birth of a Nation. I need about like an hour for that because it's a 3-hour movie. Like, so we're talking 3 hours of consistently pushing this narrative. Ridiculous. But in a nutshell, it's more or less like a white supremacy Ku Klux Klan support recruitment movie. Yeah, definitely recruitment tool. Definitely propaganda. A lot of propaganda going on around this time. So we got 1919. The Birth of a Nation is dropped. The following year, 1920, the First World War just came to a halt. And this marks the beginning of what's known as the Roaring Twenties, or the Harlem Renaissance, which was pretty much a resurgence of people of color, rich culture, and the creation of various intellectual and artistic forms of art, music, fashion, the birth of jazz, the list goes on. Again, this topic deserves its own video, which will be coming, of course, in the future. Now, mind you, at the same time, this newly founded 100-something-year-old country, America, puts a ban on liquor. So this is the beginning of also the Prohibition era. So we got the Prohibition and the Harlem Renaissance going on right now in 1920, directly after The Birth of a Nation is released. The World War just ended, and now it's the beginning of the Great Depression. The 1920s were definitely an interesting time to be alive. Alright, just gonna hit on the 1920s a little bit. Then we're gonna get right back to where we started in 1931. Okay, so 1921, the Ku Klux Klan is still all fired up behind the movie, dropped back in 1919. Still getting spins, I'm sure, in the theaters. According to the narrative, people of color's first exhibition is held at the 135th Street branch of the New York Public Library. Jesse Binga establishes the largest black-owned bank in the United States. Later, the Tulsa race riot begins. The dire anti-lynching bill is passed, but again, it's the 1920s. We know what goes on from that point forward. It still happens. 1923, the Rosewood Massacre happens.
which apparently starts and ends with the decimation of Rosewood, Florida, and the deaths of at least apparently 8 people. I believe it was definitely a lot more. But this is again according to the narrative. 1925, the KKK marches on Washington, D.C. 1926, Negro History Week is created. 1927, the Harlem Globetrotters play their first game, and Marcus Garvey is released from jail and deported to Jamaica because America doesn't support Marcus Garvey. 1928, Oscar De Priest is one of the first men of color elected to Congress representing the South Side of Chicago. Just want to kind of add Mickey Mouse's first cartoon is created around this time too. 1929, Wall Street crashes. 1930, the newly founded America decides Pluto is a thing. 1931, America decides the Star-Spangled Banner is now a thing. And now, the scene is set. And I kind of have to reiterate how this was systematic. This was a consistent effort. And this is just the quickest video I can do on the subject without having to go too far in depth. But a lot of people would see the information and not have a lot of insight on the context around the information, which makes the information a little bit more valuable. Just a quick thought. Once you have a little bit more context to what's going on around something, you have a little bit more understanding as to what's going on with something, I guess, if it makes sense. So it's 1931 now. And according to Wikipedia, the first Looney Tunes cartoon was created on April 17, 1930. It was titled Sinking in the Bathtub. And I can just say the Merry Melodies and Looney Tunes history is another video by itself. So yeah, I just kind of want to point out before I get started with the Censored 11 how this narrative was pushed for as long as America had been established. And over time, I'm going to show the evolution thereof. But we're going to start right here with these Censored 11 that were created, as you see, in 1931, but were only then pulled in the 1960s.
Alright, so it's looking like I'm going to have to just end this video here. But before I do want to talk about how I got censored by Warner Brothers. Respectfully, it definitely left me salty, primarily due to me seeing a lot of commentary videos that involve a lot of other content, from movie reviews to video game reviews. And it's interesting to me because even more so when I did my research on the Censored 11, I came across a few different YouTube videos using a lot of the same content. So I just thought that was funny. You know, I know I'm a new YouTuber. I know I'm a new channel. I know I've literally only been here for like 30 days. So yeah, my video was immediately copyright claimed. But yeah, I guess enough about that. Hopefully I was able to go through a few of the well-known stereotypes of today and back then that were developed around a particular time and over time have evolved. I also decided to drop this video because I do feel like when YouTube took my video down after Warner Brothers started crying and completely disregarded the idea of fair use, whatever that convoluted, confusing situation that is through a knowledge suppression attempt. I feel like this was an attempt to suppress knowledge. But whatever. Put a tinfoil hat on my head and call me a CT. But yeah, I hope you guys like this video. The part 2 will be coming out in a few days actually. So yeah, again, like, share, subscribe, and thank everyone for your support. I really do appreciate it. Trust me, these videos will get so much better as I get better and learn more. But yeah, alright, that's it. Namaste. Lit.